and thank you so much for having me here today at Domus Academy. I had a walk around the campus just half an hour ago, and it seems to be a really beautiful, dynamic place to be. So really excited to be here. In my presentation today, I want to speak to some of the trends that I see, that we see at Frog, looking around us across different industries, looking just generally at what's happening in the world of creativity and design. I would describe this moment in the world around us as highly volatile. It's one of the most interesting periods, really, in the context, at least of my career. I've always felt like design and creativity sits somewhere on the cutting edge, right? Where we're exploring new technologies, new ideas, and really navigate the kind of the landscape around us. But this moment in time feels quite different. There's a lot of things happening, and I want to speak to some of the things that we see in that context today, and speak to why I'm excited about the work that we're doing and the world of creativity and design, and also try to speak a little bit about an era that I see shaping right now, that I refer to as an era of impermanence, and I will kind of deconstruct and pull that apart in the coming slides, and really try to frame a way that creatives and designers can think about how we enter into this new space. So just to introduce myself very briefly, my name is Andreas Markdalen. I'm the Global Chief Creative Officer of Frog. I've been working, as Giovanni said, with design and creative for the last 20-25 years. Started out really as a self-taught designer, worked my way up within the industry between a few different agencies and companies over the last 25 years. Ended up in Frog a little bit by mistake, actually. Many of my colleagues have a very deep and long relationship to industrial design and to Frog as a brand. I came in a little bit from the side and really found an amazing community and brand that I wasn't really understanding when I first joined. And it's been really an amazing experience for me to be with Frog for 15 years. Started out as a senior designer and have kind of grown through my career now to end up in the position that I'm in. And I focus on three things in my work. Right now I support business development and key accounts globally. I'm based here in Italy. I'm Swedish, I should have said that before. So I focus on business development and account development around the world. I support our internal marketing and storytelling and value proposition efforts as we go to market. And on top of that, I support also something that is extremely important for me personally, building culture and community around creativity within Frog. So those are my three areas of focus, essentially. And if you don't know Frog, there is a long way to tell the story. I will kind of, through my presentation, pull apart some pieces of Frog history and put that in context to what we see today. But where we are right now is really trying to go through a transformation. We see the world changing around us, and we want to be at the cutting edge and at the forefront of that. So we are redefining our value proposition as a creative consultancy. We work and look for the magic in the intersections between different capabilities, really looking for, trying to connect the world of brand with the world of business strategy, the world of experience design, activation and enablement. And that allows us essentially to look at trying to solve very complex systemic challenges for our clients, and doing so always with creativity and human-centered innovation at the core. And one of the things that is absolutely key for us, that sit at the core of everything we do, is trying to make sense of the world around us. And really what I'm most fascinated about as an innovator, as a designer, and as a creative is around shaping narratives. Narratives are extremely important for Frog in terms of how we speak to our clients, trying to put things into context, trying to connect the dots, and trying to help people understand things in new ways. Narratives and storytelling is arguably the most important way to do that, or one of the most important ways of doing that. And right now we are in this context where a lot of things are changing. There's a lot of volatility around us. The world of creativity in design in particular, sorry, one step back, is very much under scrutiny. We are essentially coming through a period of many of the things that we take for granted when it comes to design and creativity being put under inspection, and people are asking, where is design and where is creativity going? There's kind of two dimensions to this starting point. One is around creativity as a whole, where we see over the last decade different narratives pushing us, different tools, different ways, methodologies and processes, essentially allowing a lot of different people through different communities approaching client challenges in similar ways, or using a kind of copy and paste mentality between different projects. And some people are starting to ask, are we as creative as we have been in the past? And is creativity starting to stall? Similarly, on the design side, we've also seen the kind of democratization and the commoditization of design tools, of design methodologies and design approaches. And also there's been this kind of copy-paste mentality where a lot of the narratives over the last few years have we come to a kind of a point where design needs to evolve to become something else? And I think these narratives are important for us because they really come to the core for how we approach problem solving. And I think understanding how we got here, the best way to do so is kind of looking back. And I'm going to use the kind of frog story to speak a little bit about how we ended up in the place that we see today. And hopefully by doing that, we can also look forward and look into the future together. I'm going to move a little bit to the side so you can see what I'm sharing as well. And I want to start here with a tweet that Frog's founder, Hartmut Esslinger, posted a year and a half ago, just coming out of the COVID period. And it was a tweet that he published that went viral on both Twitter and LinkedIn, where he was celebrating the 40-year anniversary of some of the most iconic work that Frog had done in the past. If you haven't heard this story, Frog and Hartmut worked together with Steve Jobs back in the early 80s to define the first design language for what was then called Snow White, so if Apple II and the very early Apple products. And that really became the starting point for Frog as a kind of design icon in the industry. And it also became kind of the way for Steve Jobs to build his reputation and put Apple on the map. And what was really beautiful about this tweet, and I think something that resonated with everyone, was of course, the style of the photography. You can see Siggy here on the right-hand side being one of the original OG Frogs from back in the 80s. She looks almost like a cast member from Stranger Things. Really cool, 80s, absolutely perfect photo shot. But beyond that, there was also something about the form factor and the product and the design itself that just connected with people. There was this idea of course, looking at the object, this MacBook concept that looks very similar to the devices that we're using today. It was very easy to connect it to a kind of emotional impact and see in a very physical form how design could be timeless and transcend time just through its manifestation. And that obviously had this immediate ripple effect. And in fact, the Frog story back then was very much defined around physical objects, around artifacts, around storytelling that started with the creative exploration of an object or of a form factor. In fact, Hartmut Esslinger spoke about form follows emotion, right? Being able to transmit this connection with an object that happened in real time, where someone could hold something or pick something up and form this relationship in that immediate interaction. And that was really the way, the kind of lens in which you looked at design and creativity in those days, that kind of immediate connection to an object or an artifact. And in those days, what we saw was that this representation of the artifact was kind of also a perfect metaphor for the way design was shaped. Design was something that could be quantifiable, it could be brought back to an industrial design object or a story around an object, and it was very concrete and tangible. And what we've seen with the evolution of Frog and with the evolution of design, with the kind of evolving discourse around creativity, is that things have become more ambiguous and more complex over time. We've seen the dynamics in the way in which we describe design really evolve to become something quite different. In many cases, looking at evolving from the 80s to the 90s into the 2000s, design actually became more and more invisible. We started talking about systems, we started talking about services, we started talking about qualities to experiences that you might not even see or hold or touch. And in that context, the storytelling around form follows emotion took a completely different shape. And in fact, us as frogs started saying, so what does that actually mean now? And that is just a mindset shift that has happened over the last few decades that speak to the evolution that we've gone through as creatives and as designers. And this has been the journey, essentially moving from a very strong core, something very defined, something very concrete in the early days, speaking about symbols and artifacts and objects, evolving that in the 60s and 70s into kind of the early stages of product design, then growing that out to product ecosystems and service ecosystems, these intangible connections between larger touch points. Then in the 90s and 2000s, with the introduction of IDEO in particular, introducing design thinking, design broke away from the artifact completely and from the system completely, becoming associated with the way of thinking, almost like a verb, like being able to think about innovation processes, being able to orchestrate organizations, not only to shape things that go out into the market, but to build new types of structures that would allow innovation to thrive and to grow and manifest itself in different ways. Into the kind of final stage where we are right now, in the outer boundaries, where over the last 5 or 6 years, probably even beyond that, it's been mainly about shifting the dynamics from thinking about human-centered design to planet-centric design, moving into a kind of regenerative era where the systems and the experiences that we create, one of the main criteria for assessing quality is what is the impact on the environments around us. And this has been kind of a natural progression and a natural evolution of the industries that speaks very much to the history of Frog. Like, we've literally seen decade by decade our portfolio evolving to represent this. In the very early days, looking at Hartmut's work for Sony and Apple, being about this concrete product. In the 90s, moving into digital, and there's a famous anecdote around this, that there was a vote between the frogs whether we should work on digital or not. And it was like 51 to 49% that yes, we should do it, which seems outrageous today. But that was the kind of the moving into a new barrier and being able to transcend design. That was a big deal. And then over 2000s and the 2010s, like really starting to explore new boundaries, looking at new ecosystems, new touch points, and starting to think about design as a process, as a way of designing organizations, and then moving into the new era of regenerative futures. And this speaks to the nature of the creative. It speaks to the nature of designer. There's this beautiful quote that I use in most of my presentations that just speak to how we operate, how we think as innovators, and I'm assuming this is true for most of us here in the room, where it's always about defining the next larger context for the work around us. So Eero Saarinen, of course, famous architect and designer, said, always design a thing by considering it in its next larger context. A chair in a room in a house in an environment, and an environment in a city plan. So it's about understanding the bigger picture and the context of the thing that you're creating, zooming one level out so that you can affect the context around it and drive better results. This is just something that is imprinted into the designer and has been part of our narrative for the last couple of decades and beyond. And that has taken us to currently where we are right now, and where we find ourselves, where we have this mindset of always expanding. And on top of that, we've always strive to be more inclusive and more accessible in our approach. So beyond that, we've kind of started to socialize and build upon these themes, these sub-narratives over the last few decades, where we speak about everyone being a designer. So designer design and creativity being something that everyone can unlock, something that is completely inclusive and where we co-create and share a process together, either with our clients or with our users or with the communities that we're designing for. Design is about the outcomes, being able to drive for KPIs and metrics that will allow for high quality outcomes and high quality results at all times. Designing for societal impact and being able to translate design to new areas, always moving to that outer boundary. These are some of the statements that we've been using over the last couple of decades as a natural consequence of us zooming out to the next dimension. And where we are today, and coming back to kind of that initial slide where I was speaking about narratives and speaking about design and creativity, almost coming to a threshold right now where it's like, okay, what's next? With some of these narratives, we've also seen a kind of backlash, and this is something that has been very prominent over the last few years. And I will use this as a transition to speak about generative AI, where we have kind of conclusively as a community come to the point that, yes, everyone is a designer, but we've also seen a massive backlash on this in the last few years, where craft and excellence in terms of what we do on an everyday basis has also been not forgotten, but it's been less prioritized. It's less impactful to speak about craft now than it was in the days of Hartmut Esslinger, for instance. Like, he defined his whole character and persona around the craft of what it was doing. Now that has become an open platform, and it's harder to speak about craft in that context. We also see that outcomes-led design has driven us towards monocultures in expression, where fewer designers, fewer creatives take actually risk. There is less provocation, and less people are willing to put themselves on a limb to make, create a speculative future where some status quo is being challenged. We see less and less of that. And we speak more about societal impact, but we also, and I feel this with every community, creative community that I speak about, is that the larger we make the stage around us, and the larger scene we set for design in terms of speaking about impact, the more helpless we also feel at times. And being able to set standards for ourselves that are sometimes impossible to reach, you can sometimes blow up the scope of the challenge that you have in front of you, that you take the whole guilt of all of the world around you into every single design challenge. That's also something that I hear from a lot of people that I speak to. And then on top of that, like this idea of design being able to translate to everything, we've also in that potentially, and I'm just putting these out as provocations, lost the ability to appreciate the small challenges and the kind of core challenges that used to be affiliated with design back in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. So right now, we are in this interesting moment where it feels like the design narrative is being poked at, it's being challenged, and everyone is kind of waiting for what's coming next, like what is the next chapter for design? And that also extends into the world of creativity. How do we move the needle? How do we start to infuse new thinking into our work? And how do we elaborate on the narrative? And when I speak to designers, in particular within Frog, I speak about this as kind of death by a thousand cuts, all of these small things that are happening that are starting to undermine and tarnish the design narrative. But it's probably just a discussion about calibration, right? Where do we want to take this craft moving forward? And it's really interesting now, on the threshold that we're on, moving into the world of generative AI, that we're having these challenges, right? Because the one thing I think is pretty much acknowledged by everyone is that generative AI is seen as an accelerator for most of the trends that we've been observing over the last decade. So when we speak about experiences, for instance, contextualization or personalization, being able to form experiences in the moment, all of these ideas are being accelerated in real time with the help of generative AI. And I believe also when we speak about design and creativity, that we'll see some of these elements of democratization, commoditization, and industrialization of our work being accelerated in this new era as we move forward. And What has been really interesting over the last years, obviously following this onslaught, probably double clicking there, this onslaught of absolute radical change. It feels crazy to imagine that it's only 1 year ago since ChatGPT was launched by OpenAI. I don't know if you've all been following the drama over the last week or so. It's been like a soap opera in Silicon Valley. But 1 year ago, the world looked quite different. It's difficult to imagine how we were talking about the future 1 year ago before the introduction of some of these new tools. I've been speaking about AI and design over the last 10 years, actually, doing my very first presentation on generative AI and design back in 2015. But with the introduction of LLMs and some of the work that's been driven over the last year, we've just seen this absolute explosion. And what's fascinating about this is that it connects kind of the small questions to the very big questions. So I think what we're following right now and what's been on the top of the agenda has been essentially every single aspect of the future of work, the future of productivity, the future of relationships, the future of brand, the future of communities, all of these different topics being under scrutiny over the last few months, just with the injection of this new element. And it comes back to a bigger philosophical discussion around what is the future of human and machine interaction and what is our actual relationship with technology. And I think that's what's so captivating about this revolution that is happening right now, is that it's covering such a broad spectrum of different topics and areas. And at Frog, one of the key things that we are challenged with from our clients is essentially to help navigate this, right? Understanding and trying to look at emerging technology trends, looking at emerging societal trends, help our clients make sense of it, help them shape a vision for the future, help them understand where they should place their bets and potentially reimagine their brands or experiences as they go into this next decade. And some of the things when we come back to the world of kind of brand and experience design, creativity and design is trying to cut through the noise and look at some of the firm data points that we can work from. And one of the reports that we created with Capgemini Research Institute earlier this year, back in May, was starting to hint a little bit at some of the trends that we were observing, in particular when it came to consumer sentiment around this new technology. And there were three kind of narrative arcs that I thought were really interesting that stood out to me, where the first one was around inclusion. So essentially with the total group of people that we spoke to, one of the key insights was that baby boomers essentially was one of the more prominent groups that were exploring this new technology, that stayed up with trends. And these are people essentially between 55 and 77 years old. And one of the key attributes that they mentioned that was interesting for the reason why they were exploring this technology was around the inclusion aspect. The fact that they felt like conversing and speaking and using a chatbot was a very natural interaction for them. So this idea of the natural language interface became a great starting point for them to start interacting. And that was something that stood out to us. The second thing that stood out to us was around trust, where 73% of all consumers that we spoke to essentially were trusting the outputs that came from these different engines, whether you were looking at Midjourney in terms of imagery or just they were happy and trusted the outcomes of those. In particular with ChatGPT, of course, where they felt very secure on the fact that they could generate a high quality outcome in real time using these engines. And then on top of that, another interesting data point that stood out was around neutrality, where actually a lot of the customers that we spoke to felt like ChatGPT in particular was interesting because it wasn't owned by a brand voice. It felt like this new type of entity that represented more of an unbiased assistant, and it would be something that would give neutral advice in real time. And these are the kind of data points that we look at, within Frog as we're starting to think about this next transition into where experience is going, when you think about how we shape brands, when we think about how we might redesign a customer experience, or really evolve the conversation and the communities around the brand. We're entering a space now where most of the conversations, whether we speak about customer experience or brand experience, all of them, and that's the kind of evolving paradigm, would have an LLM, a large language model, at the core of it. And the types of questions that our clients are asking us right now is, how do we position our brand in the mix as this is emerging? What is the kind of right balance between neutrality or having a really strong brand-owned voice as part of one of these experiences? How do we shape the right mix between creating technology that is discrete and part of everyday life versus built around signature moments that are standing out? And in particular, one of the main discussions is the kind of discussion between co-pilot versus autopilot. As we're now looking at devices like Humane, for instance, the AI pin that came out last week or a couple of weeks ago was announced. It has this kind of, it's almost like a black box technology, right? Where you don't have a screen to look at. Well, there's a projector screen, but you don't really see exactly what's happening under the hood. And as you're starting to ask and put prompts and queries to this device, you're essentially, most of the magic is happening behind the scenes. And one of the key questions in that is what happens to brands like Airbnb or Booking or Uber, some of these startups that have built their whole experience around being better branded in signature moments, right? Being able to create signature experiences around hailing a car or booking a trip or something like that. When everything is managed by an agnostic device that is like a black box, where does the brand go? So these are the kind of challenges that we're starting to address and that we're discussing right now. What I think is interesting, pulling this a little bit closer back to the world of design, to the world of creativity, and the work that we're doing every day within Frog, is kind of some of those tension points, right? Moving from general intelligence to specific intelligence, moving from authentic to synthetic content, really to start to look at what is the nature of these new experiences that we're creating. And for me, one of the basic starting points that I find most fascinating is that creativity itself is changing. There's an evolving nature around ideas, where ideas right now in this current context, as we start to explore these new tools, is almost becoming a material that you mold and build things with. When I grew up as a designer and as I started my career, you moved between binary static steps in the creative process, where you moved from not having an idea to having an idea. Of course, there were a lot of different elements to that, but then from having an idea into kind of giving shape to it and exploring it in different ways. And what's interesting right now is that the idea is almost becoming kind of like a clay that you're shaping in real time. The kind of curse of the blank canvas is somehow being questioned, and we're entering this new space where the artifacts that are generated and can be created as a starting point to explore a new concept is already there, it's already moving, and it's already dynamic in nature. And you can see some examples of this in the background. Trying to get all of these to animate. No, it didn't work. Anyway, where essentially you can have multiple instances of a single expression of an idea in real time, and you kind of mold that over time with these evolving tools, having the idea becoming almost like a material. Similarly, we see the same discussion in terms of content. So also content is moving kind of beyond the binary, where also here you grew up, or I grew up, in a world where the artifact that was shaped was static and still, it was created, and that was it. And now we're moving into this space where we see hyper-contextualization, hyper-personalization, essentially being able to change the nature and the modality of the product or the content expression in real time. Some of these videos aren't playing, but the example that I'm using in the middle is from Amazon, where essentially you can generate product imagery for a shopping experience in real time based on simple prompts, auto-generating it. And it's a very interesting kind of natural progression where today on Amazon you would have a customized, personalized shopping experience for you, which might result to price or product presentation or customized offers. But now we're moving into a space where also the content, the product presentation, the way the lifestyle elements around it might also be dynamic and adapted to you in real time. And this is the kind of modality that you fluidly move between different modalities, and the content is changing based on you as you go through the experience. Similarly, on the storytelling side, and coming to the sphere, we also see that, we've kind of seen the complete implosion of the metaverse over the last year or so. Generative AI came in riding on a white horse, took over the whole show, and now no one is talking about metaverse anymore. But there are pockets of really interesting applications, in particular when it comes to immersive storytelling, where kind of geo-contextualized content that lives sometimes on the phone, sometimes it's immersive art installations, sometimes it's just serendipitous activation of a brand in real time. It's starting to emerge in new formats and is taking on a shape that we haven't really seen before. And this is one aspect of the metaverse that was maybe less celebrated over the last couple of years, but seems to stick and allows us to use new platforms for expression. Also there, hyper-personal, contextual, and very much happening in the moment. On top of that, we also see our experiences on screen changing, right? Where there's a big dialogue right now around, what is the future of the user interface? So we see the natural language paradigm taking over with generative AI. Everything is built around the prompt. Everything is built around the chat. Is that the end state? I personally don't believe so. It's very suitable for some interactions, probably not for all of them, right? And we can speak a little bit more about use cases later. But what's interesting here is that the kind of mental model for how you think about the digital experience is starting to change. Over the last 10 years, it's been about atomic design. It's been about building blocks, Lego bricks, assembling applications that are always quite heavy and built out for all of the different edge cases around us. It's quite possible to imagine a near-term future where the assembly of a product or an experience is happening in the moment. It's low footprint and only based on the actual elements of that experience that you need in the moment. And that's also kind of just a change of the mindset for how you think about the architecture of an application. In terms of technology and physical form factors, we're also starting to look kind of beyond the smartphone as the main touch point. And I spoke before about Humane's generative AI pin, right? It's starting to, or AI pin. It's starting to look for new form factors that are true to the technology, that allows us to distribute the technology over our bodies or into the environments around us. And also here we see a lot of really interesting discourse where there's this kind of discussion that brings a continuous loop of input and output. Devices and products and touch points that are sensorial in nature, that is always listening, always responding, always kind of staying in tune with the user that is wearing them, and is also using that to feedback, creating a feedback loop so that they can optimize and modify experiences in real time. I'm saying that on a very high abstracted level, but it's essentially technology that is moving in new directions away from the screen interactions on the smartphone that we've seen very commonly, of course, used over the last, since the introduction of the iPhone. And that's also very exciting. One example of this you saw on the previous slide. It's work that we've done with JP Morgan within our Frog team in New York, where essentially the question that we were exploring with JP Morgan was, what is the future of the payment ecosystem? And this is work that was just completed last year. We're just about to launch a case study on our website. But they were thinking about the future of entertainment and the gambling ecosystem, essentially. You can see some video snapshots on the right-hand side. When you go to a casino or a gambling experience, is there a way that you can minimize the touch point or the friction to make transactions, to place bets, to do all of these different things? in order for you to focus and be completely immersed on the experience. And the outcome that the team came up with was this wearable device, this ring that was created that looks almost like a piece of jewelry that just becomes this hidden element on your body, completely discreet, designed almost to disappear, but becomes a very subtle, beautiful way of connecting to a brand experience. And that's the kind of challenge that we see more increasingly now when we speak about physical form factors, industrial design, being able to understand that spectrum between design that in some cases is built or designed almost to disappear from you, to be completely discreet, to be embedded and calm into your environment, versus on the other side of the spectrum, technologies like the stuff Apple is launching now with Vision Pro, where you're putting something on top of your face and you're being transported into a new space. And that's a really interesting kind of dichotomy and tension point where we see these different experiences moving our touch points and experiences into new directions. So all of these 5 themes are taking us into this new era that I refer to as an era of impermanence, which is an era that speaks to the nature of experiences that is slightly different from what we've seen before. It's very much about experiences that are shaping for you in the moment. They are fluid, they are fleeting, they might be ephemeral. They have an element about them which is personalized, of course, and being truly personalized in a way that we haven't seen before, and hyper-contextual and being minimum footprint, so assembled for you in the moment. And this is kind of the dominating trend that I think is kind of leading the discourse around how we're starting to think about these new experiences in the era of AI. So what about how we create, and I probably need to pick up the pace a little bit here. What about how we create and how we design things? Well, obviously there's this kind of interesting spectrum and another tension point right now between these new technologies, what they offer us in terms of tools and possibilities, where we see a lot of effort right now being put on the left-hand side, being able to automate, which is something fantastic, right? Being able to reduce the amount of repetitive tasks in a creative or a design process, and being able to allow us to focus on the bigger topics, bigger questions. But what I'm also personally excited about is the stuff that you see more on the right-hand side, evolving beyond automation, not just being able to use machine-assisted processes to get something done quicker and more efficiently, but actually uncover new types of value for our customers and the people that we design things for. So one example of that kind of represents this transition from automation into augmentation is a project that we completed earlier this year with a Mexico City-based techwear company, where essentially we got together to create a capsule collection, a fashion collection, that allowed us to merge together speculative design and looking at future scenarios for environmental realities that we saw coming ahead. And this was a kind of a pop-up exhibition that we did for Cannes Lions back in June. But we also produced some of the items in this collection, which was really exciting. It's a super cool brand, by the way. You have to check out Machina. Really amazing stuff on Instagram. So in this project, essentially, we looked at 4 different realities. And when we look at speculative design, we obviously want to create objects and artifacts, narratives and storytelling that shows a future vision that you can have a discussion around, that drives some debate, and that can provoke new types of ideas. And in this case, we wanted to take some weather extremes and look maybe 5 or 10 years into the future. Obviously, what we realized was that all of these things are very much happening right now. Over the last few months, we've seen all of these 4 different extreme realities taking shape in Europe, for instance. So we've all seen and felt it, which is terrible, but also makes this more urgent, right? So essentially, we use these 4 scenarios for the future to ideate on different ideas and different ways that you could bring fashion into this. First of all, how can we tell a story around this future environment? How can we place people inside of it? And then how can we dress these people and shape a fashion line that puts focus on some of the key attributes that they are experiencing in their daily lives? And what you can see here is essentially some of the process elements, video not playing perfectly, but that's fine. where we're essentially using a kind of combination of our best toolkit from the last couple of decades, intuitive immersion, just building mood boards, working together as a team, exploring different ideas, while also introducing some new elements into the mix. So essentially using ChatGPT as a way to drive provocations and setting those future scenarios, building out the environments, understanding the engine essentially, or asking the engine what might be the people living in this environment, what are their daily lives look like, what are their daily lives looking like, so that we can start to shape a story, and ChatGPT was involved for all of that. As we started to explore aesthetics and the garments and the environments for these, we used, of course, Midjourney for aesthetic expression. We trained the model using stable diffusion on some of the outcomes from that until we found an expression that we liked. And then essentially we used ChatGPT to start to ask for also ideas for features of some of these garments, like what could be example features that you might bring into clothing. The most important part of this is in the top left corner, the prototyping, like being able to make things real, where we, based on the ideas that we found, we started to prototype on like little Barbie doll sized models, just to kind of physically try out some of these ideas and explore with our hands. And that for me represents kind of the best of the future and the best of the current, where we can really infuse our ways of thinking with these new methodologies while also being able to prototype and build in real time. So what came out were 4 different stories with these different environmental futures. Just to give you a couple of examples of the kind of garment features that stood out. This Watery World Order spoke of a future that was, of course, led by floodings. Here we created a kind of a material approach that prevented fungi in the different compartments where the skin and the materials touched. In the Furious Heat and Hostility, we looked at building air pockets inside of the clothing to moderate the temperature. And in Borderlands of Civilization, in the bottom right, we created a parka outfit that also came with a shelter that you could use as a kind of nomad in this future environment. All of this comes back to stories, right? Being able to look at the future and finding qualities that are future-proof, understanding that will, what kind of ideas, what kind of stories will stand the test of time. And for us, what's really important is to think about timelessness, being able to bring in that element of something that will be durable, that doesn't just speak about the tech trend at the moment or the hype cycle, in this case generative AI, that can just be added as a label on top of things. And one of the most common techniques, and I think you're exploring, of course, similar things as part of your daily work as well, is looking at kind of future casting, right? Being able to take a kind of speculative lens into the future, introduce new technologies, societal meta trends, whatever it might be, and understand how you can operate in that future environment. The thing that we always try to anchor our work around is human truisms. Like, what are the elements about human nature, about human behaviors that won't change, that have been the same for the last 50,000 years, coming out of the Ice Age and becoming the modern human beings that we are today. And human truisms are, there are multiple different spectrums that you can tap into, but 4 truisms that often come back to me and to us, and that I think are relevant when we think about emerging technologies like generative AI, are these 4. So essentially using technology, first of all, as a means to acquire superpowers. Secondly, as a way to tell new stories. Thirdly, to find ways of building human connection and connecting to other people, building empathy. And fourthly, the idea of making order out of chaos. All of these are truths that have been with us since the invention of, going back, if we look at the previous trend, the internet, mobile technologies, electricity, fire, the wheel, like all of these different innovations, right, that have been able to push humanity forward. These have been true. And it's interesting right now when we think about these new technologies that are happening, like how they are enabling these truisms to grow and evolve into the future in that context of timelessness. So looking at being able to acquire superpowers, we've seen the last year this idea about co-pilots and autopilots allowing us to do more as creative and as designers. Adobe and Figma's video that was launched a couple of weeks ago being a perfect example of this, essentially being able to elevate the team productivity, team ideation by creating completely new ideas with the assistance of the machine. Perfect example of getting a superpower. In terms of storytelling, we start to see completely new formats. Holly Herndon on the bottom right is one of my favorite examples. She's been working over the last year to build out essentially digital replicas of herself, training models on visual materials, on her music and on her audio to be able to essentially scale herself into completely new spaces. What we see right now that is so interesting is that we're starting to transcend beyond modalities, where artists can move from music to graphic design to game production to whatever else in real time. And these are the new storytelling formats that are emerging and will allow us to connect to this technology a lot even further into the future. In terms of human connection, there's a whole narrative around synthetic relationships that feels super dystopian to me, but there are probably really nice elements, in particular when speaking about mental health and being able to get kind of real-time guidance and real-time support for problems that you're facing. But some of the examples that I featured here on the slide is more around inclusion and accessibility in terms of the experiences that we're creating. Being able to simulate and create synthetic inputs from users that could be based on training sets that you developed based on qualitative insights or qualitative research that you've done with your teams. Being able to understand and translate contents, again, between different modalities, helping people maybe with visual impairment or hearing impairment to be able to understand and access content that they haven't been before. All of these are ways of connecting with each other in new ways. And then the final theme that stands out for me is around how we make order out of chaos, where we see tools like Midjourney, for instance, right now. Has everyone here used Midjourney? Just to double check. Yes, most of you. For every prompt that you put in, you get 4 variations, right? Or 4 different options. And then from those, you can go deeper in and explore sub-variations. It's quite easy to imagine in the nearby future that the number of options will grow. You will move from 4 to 50 to 100 to 1,000. And what I think we'll see more of are these kind of manifold explorations when you might have thousands of design solutions plotted against a single prompt or a single problem, and you can start to ask this software that we're using, like what is the most appropriate design, what is the least appropriate design, what is the most provocative design, what is the opposite of good common sense, stuff like that. So that will allow us to do better work and also more provocative work if you're hacking the machine to do something completely unexpected. And that's interesting for us, right, as we're entering this new era, because we have all of these new narratives that are starting to take shape in front of us. And I'm getting towards the end of my presentation now, where we're entering this completely new space, right, where tools are shaping the way that we think about creativity, ideas, the creative process, what it means to be a designer, how we think about human value. But there are some elements also when it comes to our craft and the way we think about our work that are truly timeless. And these are 3 narratives that I think are really important, and I think we'll get deeper into in some of our conversations after this as well. Where I see very much on the left-hand side this idea around the progressive narrative, right? Being able to understand what happens in society when we start introducing these new tools. I think it's a designer and a creative's role to be part of kind of making sense out of that conversation, having and forming a strong human-centered point of view around regulation and ethics, social impact, planetary impact. It's so critical to everything that we do. On the right-hand side, we speak about the organizations where this technology will land, where we come out of a decade of digital transformation, where companies have been rebuilding their whole organizations to be more innovative. Most of those efforts have failed, 90% in fact. And we as Frog have been helping them over the last decade to make sure that moves in the right direction. That element will still be there now with AI as well, being able to facilitate AI transformation, driving empathy, driving co-creation and facilitating that. And then finally, as makers in the middle, being able to go back to the absolute basics, the timeless qualities that will never go out of fashion. And really, they are being now more important than ever before. What are the right questions to ask? How do you ask a really good question? I think that's, for a creative and a designer or an innovator today, is arguably the most important point. Being able to improve the experience for how you move from that prompt or that question into a process and bringing it to fruition. And then finally making it real. From that example that I mentioned before with the fashion line that we were creating with Machina, being able to connect a computer-assisted process into real-life prototyping, building things, making things. And I know that's very much part of Domus Academy's ethos as well. Finally, I think arguably the most important thing out of all of this is about emotion. As we move into this new era, as more and more things are starting to become synthetic, created with these new processes, with these new tools, I think we're going to develop a kind of resistance to all things synthetic. In the same way as you see stock photography or something else, and you're like, that's not real. It's not. That has nothing to do with real life. We will be able to see like what's an app, what's an experience, what's an object that has been generated by a copy and paste machine-assisted synthetic process, and we will react to it in some way. So the question, I guess, for all of you and all of us working on these kind of challenges is, how do you get to actual real human emotion when you create something in this new reality? How can you create something that breaks the boundaries of this synthetic experience, and how can you push through and make sure that you create something that is absolutely timeless in this new context? That's my kind of challenge for you. Thank you.
Yes, it was really interesting. I hope that you agree with me. And so I have a very long list of questions, but probably we have less time.
I went a little bit further, yes.
Yeah, so maybe we can keep this within 10 minutes and then leave the space to the students. And maybe we can start from the last point you were addressing, so the dichotomy between synthetic and genuine. And I like the word genuine, and in particular I say the meaning of it. And so since my memory is like, it's not working properly, so I have to say the two definitions here. So genuine could be like something that being actually and exactly what is claimed. And the other one that I like to say even more is like of undisputed origin and not a copy, genuine. And so when it comes to AI, and so generative AI in particular, so we know that what is like considered as like the display of some genuine creative intent, we know that behind it there is a lot of processes that relate to, probabilistic calculation, and so at the end of it is like reproposing data that are coming from the past in a, consider some probability, and so there's nothing new there, exactly, and so there is nothing genuine there, and so how we can use Gen AI to produce something that is genuine at this point?
I mean, my pushback, because we have to have a little bit of debate, and that was kind of part of the initial piece of the presentation, is that over the last 10 years, we've as human beings started to work like this already. Like we have been driven by the dogma of the process, the idea of just taking the same starting point, the same methodology, the same frame of mind, the same narrative, and apply it across one thing after the other. We've also become more KPI and metric sensitive, data driven in our approach, always optimizing for efficiency. And that is taking us into a space where we've kind of teed this up perfectly for Gen AI to come in and do what we do, but better. So like I would argue that we've kind of lost a little bit of that human edge already to our own fault over the last 10 years. But like what I think is really exciting about this is how you can start to do maybe two things. Like I think that there would be a kind of resurgence of human intuition, being able to explore ideas that come, being able to explore more in real time, more fast, things that just might come on a whim, try them out, maybe getting to something a little bit quicker and test that out a little bit sooner. And in doing so, cutting the process and the time to get something in front of maybe a user or customer or something else. So the human intuition, I think, could be actually enabled to move faster and be more strengthened in this context. On top of that, I also think that you can potentially use, there's the story around hallucinations now, which is mainly around, it's a kind of negative, has a negative tone to it, because hallucinations are essentially what happens when machines don't know the answer and they just make shit up, right? Maybe there's a way that you can start to hack the machine or fool the machine or play with the machine so that it comes up with unexpected solutions and it takes you into new spaces. And in that sense, it puts pressure on you as a creator with really human skills, being able to curate, being able to go on a feeling, being able to move down a path where you might not have a process to rely on. So I think actually there could be new tools that are intuitive and magical in the creative process that could push us to be more genuine. I think the fear that I have, and that was kind of the last point, is when everything becomes automated for efficiency, and where there is a paradigm of best practices that is just applied to everything will just be more mediocre and vanilla than the stuff that we see today, which is already pretty bad in many cases. So that's the kind of balance where you probably have the next creative movement, the next design movement, being essentially able to hack the machine in different ways, combine that with human intuition, and just break things and come up with really unexpected outcomes. So that would be my dream, at least.
Okay, I like it. So we're discussing this already, but basically this idea of human intuition being there, helping designers or human beings in general, say properly using Gen AI or using in a way that is gonna increase creativity and imagination or whatever. It is interesting, but the way I'm seeing it, and so now we start fighting.
Yes, please.
So if I look back at those, let's say, charts you shared, so, and if I look at in particular the one in the middle, so people trusting the output of Gen AI. Yeah. So if you trust something, you refuse to question whatever is producing as an output. I don't know. How that human intuition can emerge. Yeah. I guess we were talking about this already, maybe yesterday or something like that. So there was this article from this professor from the University of Cambridge who was saying, so with Gen AI, we finally automated bullshit. I don't have to say this stuff. Okay, but yeah, let's beep it. And it was saying basically then, and it is in this way because what is going to happen is that at the end Gen AI in this case is replicating exactly what we already see on Twitter with politicians. I'm not making any name here, so it's like politicians in general, where they're allowed to claim whatever they want in a very persuasive way without any effect attached to it, and Gen AI is exactly doing this. And this is interesting to me because what is stating is that behind Gen AI there is a lot of more than the output we actually see. Just this is one layer. There are many other, let's say, hidden layers. So I can go on the environmental side of it. So we know that the output is not just simple text. It's going to produce some effect on the environment. And I also know that behind the output you consider magic, there is actually human labor that is also exploited in some way. And critical things such as lack of psychological safety for those guys who have been exposed to a lot of crazy content, and because they have to label stuff in order for Gen AI to produce something that is valuable for you. And so in this case, I don't know how human intuition can emerge if the audience, as you were showing, is so distracted or so uninterested. They don't care about fact. They take whatever it is and they use it. Yeah. So. How do you see this one?
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with the problem. The other thing that came out from the same report was that only a third of all of the respondents cared about the intellectual property of the original artist for the imagery that was created. So it's it was kind of shocking to hear that. But I mean, yeah, I think it's definitely it's also like a paradigm shift, right? If you, I'm trying to think of good comparable examples, but like when music moved online and people started getting access to Napster, the first thing people did was to get really excited and download.
They know Napster, by the way.
Oh yeah, so it's a tool to download MP3s and music files before Spotify.
Before the broadband connection, it was like
Yeah. So you could essentially, like, moving from buying albums. I don't know. Maybe you all know this. I don't. But moving from albums to stealing albums.
In 2 days.
I feel so old.
Yeah, in 2 days almost. I was leaving the computer there downloading stuff.
No, but so like there was the immediate ethical implications of that, in the sense that people weren't paying for the music, the artist got outraged. Metallica, the people that actually protested against this were like cancelled. And it took then like 3 or 4 years for Spotify to emerge, a new mindset, a new revenue model, a new way to think about music to evolve. And like, I'll finish that sentence and then come to another point. But like, I think what was interesting was that in that short period on Napster, people weren't behaving really ethically, and they did a lot of bad things. And artists were scrutinized while they were losing their money. So probably what we see here, Scott Belsky referred to this current era as like the Napster era of generative AI. Like, the regulations are not in place, the basic fundamentals haven't been established, no one knows what to do with the technology, everyone is trying everything out, there like no ethics, everyone is just doing everything. And I would hope, assume that in 3 years we will have the baseline in place so that people know how to behave. It's just a sign of maturity because it's so new. That would be my feeling. The other thing that is interesting with the Spotify example and the music is that many of the kind of paradigms for music, like the album and the single, like they came from the formats of their time. So like if you look at the single, it's a certain length because that length fit on a vinyl 45 RPM vinyl record. The album was based because it fit on the 12-inch vinyl. The CD was perfectly bringing that over to a digital format. And what's interesting now when you're moving into the digital space is that the perception of what like a musical collection is changing. Like Kanye West, for instance, I'm not sure if it's still acceptable to use him as an example, but he like launched an album, then 6 months later he added other songs and removed some that he didn't like. Like the nature of the expression, the nature of the medium is changing because the delivery mechanism is changing. And that's what I think we'll see also now with art and music and creativity with generative AI. Like some things will fall off and disappear. Some things will not be interesting anymore, and other things will come in to replace it. And the benefit might be that you will have music artists creating video games with prompts, or like you would have, people like Björk, for instance, that I'm hoping that some people might know here. She has always been kind of multimodal in her approach. She's doing like the DVDs, music, short films. And I think we'll see much more of that, but in a much more fluid way now in this new context. And so like, I think it's more like maturity. And I don't think we should kind of have a knee-jerk reaction and say it's all going to go downhill because people are stupid and they trust the technology. But I do agree with you, it's a massive problem. Yeah. That was a very long answer to very...
No, I like it. I was still consider the fact you mentioning Spotify as a potential, as a good example. No? Mm-hmm. It is interesting because also to consider, since you were saying, so we should, let's say, expand, let's say, the scope of what we design. And so if you consider the example of Spotify, it's changed the way we now, let's say, consume music, no? So like back then, from the time I was, let's say, young, same amount of years, but let's say younger, let's say, I was, let's say, consuming a CD for entire months. Yeah. No? Now, I mean, I don't even know, I don't even remember what I was listening yesterday, but still that's also a threat to, if you consider the business model, it's still a threat for artists. So it's not to say the greatest example of them all,
And to that point, like you end up in this like experience cul-de-sac where let's say I listen to Brian Eno, or ambient music, Aphex Twin, something like
old
this.
stuff. We have to update our
I just sound like a very old person. But you listen to the same artist for a week, and then you get trapped in this perpetual Spotify loop where everything is being recommended along the same lines. And Spotify might not understand that you have 10 different musical tastes depending on how you feel in the morning. And like you could imagine now, like Spotify already makes money from hiring bands to record, like, let's say, generic jazz music. And they put that as kind of interstitial songs on playlists that are generating revenue for Spotify rather than the artists themselves. And now you can imagine with generative AI, like if you have a lo-fi beats playlist on Spotify, you train a model on that, and you're essentially just going to be able to create like an ongoing lo-fi beats generative AI sequence that is all bringing the revenue to Spotify rather than to the artist. And it will also get people stuck in these experience loops. So it's, yes, I agree with you. There's also a really negative side to that.
Okay, so we should find more at this point.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I'll try to.
Okay. So maybe so we go with the last question, then we'll we'll open to the audience. I don't know if this way of reading, I mean, what you have presented is correct, but when you I guess it was like the transition section or whatever that was, and so we're describing what is, let's say, the status of the experience nowadays. The way I was looking at it was like, okay, brands now they're trying to, to involve me as much as they can with, more interactive situations, more, as I was saying, into the moment, treating stuff. But the answer of that is like what I was saying, the era of impermanence, is that as a consumer or as a client or as a customer, I live in the moment, and the stuff I made at the point disappear. And this doesn't seem that a sort of healthy relationships between brands and clients, because at the end of it, I'm left with nothing, or at least nothing until the next, let's say, experience. So brands on one side, they are, let's say, fighting to grasp to get my trust or attention, to involve me as much as they can. So they are following me, touch points everywhere. So input, let's say, device everywhere, so I can interact with them every time, every minute, and whatever. But the other side, say, my sort of answer as a client is that, okay, I live this experience, but I forget about it. So I was saying the same about Spotify. I don't remember what I was listening yesterday. So how do you see this? Is it really an healthy relationship, or is it unhealthy? So it's the opposite of it. So
yeah, I mean, I can't speak, like on the consumer side, there are multiple implications, but thinking about the brand side, and I think I mentioned this, like how if you're launching a new service, or if you're launching a new product that is primarily digital right now, and you see the birth of all of these new devices and touch points and experiences, like just to begin with, like what is a brand? Is it a data set? Is it a kind of interaction behind the scenes? Is it a signature moment? Is it a prominent thing? Is it a neutral thing? What is the right way to build a brand for these new types of environments? Like, I think that there are so many interesting questions, and I don't have the right answers. It's probably as usual with the world of design and creativity. It's like it all depends on the context and everything else. But I think what brands probably have to take into consideration is that they have to operate on a lot of different levels. So they have to be the dominant experience, maybe as a single touch point, as an application or something like that. They need to be a data layer in an autopilot environment on another type of device. And in a third moment, they might just be one signature moment that is that could be experienced in a moment of an interaction in a retail environment or something like that. Like building up that kind of emotional tapestry between different touch points, I think is going to be really like the next big challenge for all of these brands. When it comes to consumers, like what's interesting to me is that we've had over the last 4 to 5 years, we see another data point from recent studies, like I believe 93% of us, essentially, millennial, Gen Z and younger audiences choosing brands based on what they represent in terms of purpose and values, what they do in society, in terms of planetary impact, Like we build our brand belonging, brand relationships according to who these companies are. And when there's no single touch point to a brand, when you can't feel it, when there's no communication point, where does that go? And I think there it might be starting to create some interesting dynamics in terms of, like we're always going to have the classic brands like Patagonia and these that are, you know, through a communication language, through the physical garments, they can manifest something. But if you choose between Uber and Lyft that provide the same service, like where do those brands go and how do you distinguish the two? And what is the kind of community that they can build? And then I think it comes back only to kind of utility and the things that you can tactically measure. And again, like I don't know where this is going, but like it's really interesting just to think about all of these dynamics. And I think the only thing that you can say for safely about the consumer, us, is that we will demand more magic from everything we're interacting with. Like we will have a very even lower bar for like in terms of our expectations, we will expect more than ever from the services that we're interacting with. And loyalty, again, which has already gone down hill over the last 10 years, is now probably even going to be even more scrutinized. Okay. So yeah, it's hard to say where it's going, but like all of these dynamics will change.
But you see these as terms as a customer, you see so as expecting more magical moment, or you see as expecting more, you know, of concreteness, something that is going to last. This in context of the impermanence you were talking about. You may say, I don't know. I mean, that's going to be fine as well. I was also thinking to the use case you shared, so the ring case I was saying, so it's like small, it is invisible. I was thinking that in the past we were on the opposite side, so the Patagonia use cases. I want to wear Patagonia, I want to showcase that because it's also building my identity. Yeah. So, but with the ring, it's like building a lot of magical moments, but it's not there.
I'm guessing it's going to be more of everything. Okay. It's not one thing or the other. Like we'll probably see all of the extremes at all times. And I think it's going to be really fascinating. I just think expectations are going to go up in general.
Okay. Good. So, thank you, Andreas.
Thank you.
And thank you all of you.